On Christmas Eve, a poor bride taught the rancher's niece, not knowing he was a hidden millionaire. The world looked like it had been dusted in heaven's own flour. Snowflakes drifted across the long Wyoming road, soft, quiet, and endless. As the wagon jerked to a stop beside the old wooden post labeled Miller's Creek, Lila Carter tightened her grip on her thin wool coat. It was all she owned. That, and the worn carpet bag she'd stitched together from leftover fabric at the schoolhouse before they shut it down and fired the teachers. She'd walked away with 3 dresses, a Bible, and a heart full of prayers that felt unanswered. Until she'd seen his advertisement. Widowed rancher seeking bride. Christian home. Assistance with young niece. Will provide room and board. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't promising. But it was something. And something was more than she had. The wagon driver tipped his hat and helped her down. "You sure this is where you want to be, miss? Folks say the rancher up this way ain't exactly warm." Lila smiled weakly. "I've lived through enough cold to handle a little more." The driver shrugged, flicked the reins and rolled away, leaving her standing alone in the whispering winter. The ranch sat just ahead, a sturdy, sprawling house with smoke barely rising from the chimney. A simple home but bigger than anything she'd ever lived in. As she approached, her boots sank into fresh snow. Her breath clouded before her. Her heartbeat sounded loud in her ears. Then the front door opened. A tall figure stepped onto the porch. Broad shoulders. Strong posture. Coat dusted in snow. Hat shadowing half his face. Her new husband. Daniel Reeves. Lila had prepared many responses for this moment. A practiced smile, a polite greeting, a hopeful introduction. But the way he stared at her, still as stone, took every word from her lips. His eyes were sharp, assessing. Not cruel, just unreadable. The eyes of a man who'd built walls no one had breached. Rumors she'd overheard during the wagon ride echoed in her memory. Daniel Reeves lost his brother last year. Some say he ain't been right since. He's a quiet one. Don't trust nobody. He wants a bride but not for love. Lila swallowed. A little girl peeked out from behind Daniel's coat, a fragile face framed by curly red hair, clutching a small book missing half its cover. The child blinked at Lila, then hid again. Daniel's voice broke the silence, deep, steady, a little rough. "You Lila Carter?" "Yes, sir," she replied softly, hoping her voice didn't tremble. He nodded once. No smile. No welcome. Just a nod. He stepped aside. "Come in before you freeze." The warmth inside the ranch surprised her, but not as much as the emptiness. There was no Christmas tree. No garland. No wreath on the door. No warm decorations. Just plain walls, a ticking clock, and the faint scent of wood smoke. Emily, the little girl, slipped inside quietly and hovered near the stairs. Lila removed her coat, praying Daniel wouldn't notice the fading patches where the fabric had worn thin. She felt out of place like a stray dog in a polished stable. Daniel folded his arms. "I need to be clear. You're not here for romance or such nonsense." Lila lowered her gaze. "Of course not, sir. I need help with Emily. She don't speak much. Don't take to strangers. Lost her parents too young." He hesitated, just a flicker of vulnerability breaking through the sternness. "I ain't offering more than a roof, meals, and a respectable arrangement. Understand?" Lila nodded, though something inside her ached at his bluntness. Still, she was grateful. Grateful to have a place to sleep. Grateful to not spend Christmas Eve wandering a cold road alone. But deep down she also wondered, why does he seem so guarded? Why such distance? What heartache was he hiding? She couldn't know. Not yet. That he carried secrets bigger than the entire ranch. She couldn't know that Daniel Reeves was not the poor, struggling rancher he appeared to be, but a man hiding a fortune so massive, it could change her life forever. For now she only saw a lonely house. A lonely child. And a lonely man who believed he'd never love again. And Lila Carter, poor, hopeful, trembling, had just walked into all their lives on Christmas Eve. The warmth inside the ranch house was deceptive. The fireplace crackled softly, but the air between the 3 of them, Daniel, Emily, and Lila, was colder than the winter storm outside. Lila stood near the entryway, clutching her carpet bag, uncertain where to step or how to breathe around the man whose gaze seemed to read every secret in her bones. Emily lingered halfway up the stairs, small fingers curled tightly around the railing. Her red curls glowed like little flames in the lamplight, but her eyes held none of the fire. They were dim, tired, cautious. Daniel cleared his throat. "Emily," he said, voice firm but gentle, "this is Miss Lila. She'll be stayin' with us for a bit." Emily didn't answer. She just stared. The silence stretched so long Lila felt it pressing on her shoulders. Finally she knelt down, not too close, just close enough for the child to hear her whisper warmly, "Hello, sweetheart. I'm very glad to meet you." Emily blinked once, then retreated up the remaining steps, half hiding behind the wall as she peeked down again. Lila's heart softened. Children were never her fear. Adults were harder. Daniel let out a slow exhale, rubbing the back of his neck. Don't expect her to talk," he said. "She ain't spoken much since the accident." Lila looked up gently. "I understand." Daniel shifted uncomfortably under her calm tone, as if kindness was harder for him to handle than silence. He gestured for her to follow him toward the kitchen. The house was neat, functional but lifeless. No stockings on the mantel. No pine branches. No candle in the window. Just bare walls and grief packed into the corners. Daniel noticed her eyes taking everything in. "I don't decorate," he muttered. "Oh," she said softly. "I see. It's just a day," he added quickly as if defending himself. "Never cared much for all the fuss." Lila nodded, though something inside her pinched. Christmas had always been the one day she wished someone would fuss over her. He motioned toward the table. "You'll take the room upstairs, first door on the left." She nodded. He hesitated again, his jaw tightening as though he despised what he had to say next. "Listen, Miss Lila." There it was. The distance again. Formality stuffed between them like a wall of bricks. "I ain't lookin' for affection or courtship," he said bluntly. This ain't that kind of arrangement." Her stomach twisted, though she had expected as much. "I know," she whispered. "I just need help with Emily. And someone to keep the house in order. You'll be treated fair. Respected. But don't expect." Lila interrupted gently. "Daniel, I'm not here for anything except to belong somewhere. Even if it's only a little." His brows lifted, surprised she had the courage to speak his name. Surprised by her honesty too. The man seemed more accustomed to arguments, not quiet truth. A long silence settled between them. Then, a soft sound broke it. Emily had inched down the stairs again, still clutching her half-torn book. She stared at Lila the way a skittish fawn studies a stranger. Lila smiled warmly. "May I see your book?" Emily froze. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. "She ain't gonna let you touch it," he warned. "She guards that thing like it's gold." Lila didn't push. She simply sat on the bottom stair and placed her hands on her lap. "You don't have to give it to me," she said softly. "I just wanted to know what story you're reading." Emily swallowed. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. Still she slowly climbed one step closer. One. Then another. Then. She held out the book. Just for a moment. Just close enough for Lila to glance at the cover. Lila's face lit with genuine delight. "Oh, The Brave Little Elk. That was my favorite when I was small." Emily's eyes widened just a fraction, but it was enough. A spark. A connection. A thread forming out of thin air. Daniel stared stunned. "That's the most she's done for anyone," he said quietly. "Even for me." Lila looked up. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "We all talk. Some of us just use different languages." Daniel suddenly felt something tight in his chest, something he didn't recognize. Could be admiration. Could be fear. Could be both. Emily took her book back and scurried up the stairs, but her steps were lighter, her posture less guarded. When she disappeared into her room, Daniel spoke again. "You got her to do more in 5 minutes than I've done in a year," he admitted, his voice gruff with disbelief. Lila lowered her eyes humbly. "I didn't do anything," she murmured. She simply needed someone to listen. Daniel didn't know what to do with the warmth stirring inside him, so he hid it behind gruffness. "You should rest," he said, stepping back. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Lila nodded and climbed the stairs, carrying her bag. She paused once, glancing at the dim hallway that would now be her new home. Before she entered her room, she caught a glimpse of Daniel still standing downstairs, hand on the back of a chair, his brow furrowed with unspoken thoughts. She wondered what troubled him so deeply. What ghosts haunted his silence. What secrets he guarded behind those dark eyes. Little did she know. The biggest secret of all was the one he hid most fiercely. Daniel Reeves wasn't the poor rancher everyone believed him to be. He was a hidden millionaire living like a broken man. And she, quiet, gentle, unwanted Lila, was about to change his entire world. The sun hadn't yet risen when the first sounds of morning stirred the ranch awake. The soft cluck of chickens, the moan of wind against the eaves, and the steady footsteps of a man already up before dawn. Lila woke to the faint smell of coffee drifting through the floorboards. She dressed quickly, her best dress though the hem was faded, and braided her hair before stepping into the hallway. When she reached the kitchen, she found Daniel pouring himself a cup from the old iron percolator. He didn't look at her right away, though she felt him notice her presence. "Morning," he muttered, his voice low and rough with sleep. "Good morning," she said gently. Emily sat at the table, her thin legs dangling off the chair, a heavy grammar book spread open in front of her. Her curls were tangled, and her eyes looked already defeated. Lila sensed the tension before Daniel spoke. "She's been sitting like that for half an hour," he said, rubbing his temples. "Book wide open, but she won't write a single word." Emily's jaw tightened. She lowered her head further. Lila saw the fear there, not stubbornness but fear. Fear of failing. Fear of disappointing. Fear of trying. "May I try?" Lila asked quietly. Daniel hesitated, then nodded and stepped back, folding his arms with skepticism. Lila pulled out a chair beside Emily and sat down slowly, giving the girl space. "That's a mighty big book," Lila murmured, pretending to sound impressed. "Looks like it takes a real brave girl to try reading it." Emily's shoulders lifted, just a little, as though a tiny spark of pride flickered inside. Lila tore a scrap of paper from a pad, dipped a quill in ink and quickly drew a silly little picture. A crooked reindeer with enormous hooves. Emily stared. Her lips twitched. "I think you and I have the same drawing skills," Lila whispered conspiratorially. The little girl giggled, so softly it was almost a breath. Daniel froze in the doorway, eyes widening. It was the first sound Emily had made that wasn't a cry in months. Lila slid the drawing over. "See, reading is like drawing first. You just make shapes and sounds. And if you make mistakes? Well," she pointed at the reindeer, "I made plenty. But look how funny he turned out." Emily giggled again. Daniel leaned against the counter, stunned. Emily tapped the drawing once, then whispered, barely audible, "Hooves." Lila's smile grew warm, gentle, encouraging. "That's right. Can you spell it?" Emily shook her head violently. "No, too hard, too scary." But Lila tapped the page softly. "S." Emily traced the letters with her finger, her lips moving. Daniel's breath caught. She was trying. Lila praised her gently. Not too loud. Not too excited. Just enough to build confidence without overwhelming her. "You're very smart," Lila said softly. "You just need someone patient to show you the way." Emily's eyes lifted, tentative, hopeful, meeting Lila's for the first time directly. The connection was fragile but real, like a thread spun between their hearts. Daniel ran a hand over his jaw, something tightening in his chest. He stepped closer, unable to hide the awe in his voice. "That's the first thing she said in months," he murmured. Lila didn't take credit. She just closed her hand over Emily's for a brief, comforting moment. "Children bloom in the right soil," she whispered. Emily tucked herself closer to Lila's side, leaning gently. Lila froze, overwhelmed by the tiny act of trust. Daniel's breath left him. He had never seen Emily choose anyone that quickly, certainly not a stranger. For a moment, all the hardness in his expression softened into something rare, vulnerable. He cleared his throat roughly, embarrassed by his own emotion. "I need to check the barn," he muttered. "You two keep at it." But as he left, he glanced back once more, longer this time. Not at Emily. At Lila. The woman who'd walked into his cold, dead-silent home and brought warmth within a single morning. And though he didn't say it, something shifted inside him. A wall cracked. A heart stirred. A lonely man wondered what miracle had just stepped into his life. Lila didn't notice his gaze. She was too busy helping Emily trace letters with her small finger, turning the morning into a world of gentle laughter and silly drawings. But the ranch noticed. The silence noticed. The very air felt different, lighter, warmer. Like winter had met its match. Like Christmas had finally found them. In the days that followed, Lila's laughter seemed to echo through corners of the ranch that hadn't heard joy in a long time. Where silence once lived, now Emily's little giggles danced through the halls. Where cold grief hung thick, now warm lessons and gentle voices softened the edges. Daniel Reeves couldn't explain how it happened so quickly. But his home, his life, was changing. And it all began with the woman he had expected would remain a quiet, temporary arrangement, yet had become the brightest part of his winter. Morning routines turned into something more. Every morning Lila rose before dawn, her footsteps soft as feathers on the stairs. She brewed coffee, warmed the hearth, and prepared a simple breakfast. Not out of obligation, but out of a need to bring life into the home. Emily began following her around like a shy shadow. Lila let her help knead biscuit dough and stir porridge, praising every effort with sincerity so warm that Daniel sometimes lingered in the doorway just to listen. One morning, as Lila handed Emily a wooden spoon to stir a pot of stew, Daniel watched from behind, his voice unexpectedly rough. "She's smiling again." Lila glanced over her shoulder, cheeks pink from the stove's heat. She just needed someone to believe she wasn't broken. Daniel swallowed hard. Those words hit deeper than she knew. Sometimes he felt broken too. The barn encounter. One crisp evening, after Emily had gone to bed with her book hugged to her chest, Lila carried a small tin plate toward the barn. Daniel had skipped supper again, claiming fencing work, though Lila suspected he used chores to outrun his thoughts. The snow glittered under the lantern she held, her breath swirling in front of her. She found Daniel in the barn hammering a rail back into place. His sleeves were rolled to the elbows, the lamplight catching on the rugged lines of muscle and the faint scars along his forearms. He didn't hear her at first, or pretended not to. "You missed supper," she said softly. He paused mid-swing, lowered the hammer, turned slowly. When he saw her standing there, hair braided neatly, cheeks flushed pink from the cold, holding food like she actually cared, something flickered across his face. Not annoyance, not irritation, but a warmth he fought to hide. I wasn't hungry," he muttered. Lila stepped closer. "You look hungry." He huffed a small laugh, barely audible but real. The sound startled even him. She set the plate on a barrel. "You worked too hard." Daniel leaned against the stall door, arms crossed, not defensive but needing distance. Not from her, but from what her presence stirred inside him. "This ranch doesn't run itself," he said. "No," she replied softly, "but you don't have to carry all of it alone." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, then looked away. "They've all left before. I figured you would too." Lila's brows lowered gently. "I'm not they, Daniel." His breath tightened. Her voice was soft, soft enough to slip past the armor he'd worn since losing his brother. "I'm here because I choose to be," she added. For a heartbeat he believed her. For a heartbeat, he let himself imagine that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't temporary. A wound revealed without words. A loose board creaked behind them as the old barn door shifted in the wind. Lila reached out instinctively, touching Daniel's arm to steady herself. The moment her fingers brushed his skin, he froze. Her hand was gentle, barely a whisper. But to him it felt like fire melting ice. Lila pulled back quickly, flustered. "I'm sorry." "It's all right," he said quietly. Almost too quietly. He looked down at her, eyes darker than the night sky. Something passed between them. A silent story. A shared loneliness. A recognition. Before it could settle, Daniel cleared his throat and broke the tension. "Emily likes you," he said. "I like her," Lila replied. "She just needed someone to listen." He nodded, watching her with an unreadable expression. "You're good with her," he said quietly. "Better than I've been." Lila shook her head. "You're doing your best. Grief doesn't make anyone weak." Daniel stiffened. She didn't know how close she'd struck to the truth. She didn't know the ghost that haunted him. Not yet. A heart softening. Lila picked up the plate again and nudged it toward him. "Please eat," she whispered. "For Emily's sake." Daniel hesitated, then took the plate from her hands. Their fingers brushed again, light, trembling. He looked at her, something unspoken glowing in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, genuine, deep, the kind of gratitude that came from a man who rarely said the words. Lila offered a small, nervous smile. "You're welcome." As she walked back toward the house, Daniel watched her go, her figure lit by the lantern she carried, snow drifting around her like a cloak of light. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Something dangerous. Something hopeful. He whispered to himself, almost in disbelief. "She's different." And he wasn't referring to her teaching skills. Or her kindness. He meant the way his heart reacted to her without permission. The way the house felt warmer because she breathed inside it. The way Emily clung to her, not out of need but out of love. That night, as Daniel finished his meal alone in the barn, he realized the truth he never wanted to admit. He was beginning to care. And caring scared him more than any storm on the plains. Snow fell hard the next morning, blanketing the ranch in thick white silence. The world looked clean, untouched, yet inside Daniel Reeves's chest, storms swirled he couldn't quiet. Lila had been in his home less than a week, and already the walls he'd spent years building were beginning to crumble. And that terrified him. A new light in Emily. Emily woke before dawn, tiptoeing into the kitchen with her tattered book clutched against her chest. When she saw Lila already stirring a pot on the stove, she didn't run or hide. She walked straight to her, lifted her arms, asked wordlessly to be held. Lila froze in pure surprise, then swept the little girl into an embrace so gentle it could have healed a wound. Emily tucked her face into Lila's neck. Daniel stood in the doorway silently, fists buried in his pockets, breath caught in his throat. He tried everything to get Emily to speak, to laugh, to trust. Yet the tiny girl melted into Lila like she'd finally found the mother she no longer remembered. He should have felt jealous. But instead he felt something foreign, something warm, something like hope. Breakfast and a spark between two. When Lila placed eggs and biscuits on the table, Daniel cleared his throat. You didn't have to cook all this. She smiled slightly as she folded napkins. I know. But I wanted to. Daniel looked at her hands, the way she moved, gentle yet confident. Everything about her was humble, yet she carried herself like someone who'd survived storms worse than weather. Emily pulled out Daniel's chair for him. It startled him so much he blinked. Lila winked at the girl. You're quite the little helper this morning. Emily beamed. Daniel cleared his throat again. Too rough, too quick. Seems you're making a difference, he murmured. Lila looked up, eyes soft. I'm only giving her what she's needed for a long time. Their eyes held for a moment. It stretched, deepened, softened the air between them. Daniel quickly looked down at his plate. A letter arrives, and cracks form in the secret. Mid-morning, a rider braved the snowstorm and delivered a letter, thick parchment, sealed with a crest Lila didn't recognize. Daniel's jaw clenched instantly. He snatched the letter from the table so fast Lila flinched. I handle this, he muttered, heading for the back room. But Lila's eyes, though gentle, caught everything. How his posture stiffened. How his hands shook. How fear, not anger, had flashed in his eyes. Emily tugged on Lila's sleeve, whispering in a tiny voice. Uncle gets upset. Lila rubbed her back reassuringly. But inside, her curiosity kindled. Why would a simple rancher react like that to a letter sealed in gold? Why hide it? Why fear it? Daniel's breaking point. Inside the private room, Daniel tore open the letter. His worst fear confirmed. The board needs your response before year's end. Your inheritance remains untouched. This charade cannot continue much longer. The estate cannot be ignored. Daniel crushed the paper in his fist. The words seared him. Your inheritance. Estate. Year's end. He slapped a hand on the table, breathing hard. He wasn't ready. He didn't want the money. He didn't want to face the world again, the world that had taken his brother, split his family, and made him believe wealth was a curse. The ranch, small, quiet, simple, was the only place he'd found peace. And now Lila. Lila, who smiled at him like he mattered. Lila, whose presence thawed the frozen corners of his heart. Lila, who believed he was nothing more than a lonely rancher. Not a millionaire. Not an heir. Not the man newspapers used to whisper about. She can't know, he told himself, chest tight. Not yet. He stuffed the letter into the desk drawer and slammed it shut. But Lila had heard the noise. And she stood outside the room, her hand over her heart. She confronts him gently. That evening, after Emily fell asleep curled up with her favorite book, Lila found Daniel in the barn again. Hammering. Fixing things that weren't broken. Running from something. She approached him slowly. Daniel? He didn't look at her. What is it? I heard the drawer slam. It sounded like something upset you. He stiffened. She stepped closer but not too close, giving him space. You don't have to tell me, she said softly, but you also don't have to carry everything alone. Daniel finally met her eyes. And what she saw there startled her. Pain, fear, and the unmistakable weight of secrets. Lila, he began, voice low and strained. There are things about me you don't know. Things I ain't explained. She folded her hands gently. I'm not afraid of your past. It ain't the past, he whispered. It's the truth. Her heart fluttered, fearful but not for herself. Then she placed a cautious, trembling hand over his. Whatever it is, Daniel. I'll face it with you. He stopped breathing. The touch. The words. The sincerity. No one had ever said those things to him since his brother died. And in that moment, the walls around his heart cracked wide enough for something pure to slip through. He gently pulled his hand away. Not rejecting her, but trying to protect her. I ain't the man you think I am, he murmured hoarsely. You deserve to know, but I ain't ready. Lila's voice trembled with truth. Then when you are ready, I'll be here. The wind outside howled. Snow swirled in icy circles. But between them the world felt warm. Too warm. Dangerously warm. Daniel swallowed hard. He was falling. Hard. And he didn't know if he had the strength to stop it. The storm began long before the first flake touched the ground. It started in Daniel's chest. He'd sat silent the entire wagon ride home. Lila could feel it, something building, swirling, tightening inside him after the confrontation at Whitmore's store. Not anger. Not exactly. But shame. And the fear of something he could no longer hide. By the time they reached the ranch, the sky had darkened into a heavy winter gray. Snow started drifting down in soft, glimmering curtains. Emily ran inside first, laughing as the flakes kissed her cheeks. But Daniel lingered by the wagon, his hand braced against the side panel as if he needed it to hold himself up. Lila stepped down carefully, her skirts brushing the fresh snow. Daniel? She asked softly. Are you hurt? He shook his head but his jaw flexed. He couldn't meet her eyes. I need to say something, he said, voice rougher than any wind the mountain could conjure. Lila stiffened, not in fear, but in the instinctive dread of a woman who had learned too young that important words often carried heartbreak. All right, she whispered. A gust swept between them, carrying cold across her cheeks, but his next words stunned her warmer than any fire. I shouldn't have brought you to town, he said. I shouldn't have let you see, let you hear, any of that. She blinked, confused. Why? Because what Whitmore said, he wasn't wrong. Her heart lurched painfully. Daniel stepped forward, exhaling the weight he'd held for years. I'm not just a rancher, he said. Not just some man with too much work and too little money. He dragged a hand through his hair. My father, he was Elias Hartwell. The name meant nothing to her at first, until it hit. Hartwell. As in the Hartwell Railway, the Hartwell Shipping Lines, the Hartwell Northern Banks. Daniel watched the realization dawn in her eyes and hated himself for causing that flicker of shock. He left everything to me, Daniel said quietly. All of it. And I walked away. Why? She breathed, unable to grasp why any man would abandon such fortune. His laugh was humorless and hollow. Because it killed him. The greed, the backstabbing, the ivory halls where everyone smiles while sharpening the knife behind their back. I wanted no part of it. So I came here. Bought this land with my inheritance. Raised my sister. Built a life that wouldn't swallow me the way wealth swallowed him. The snow thickened, floating like soft, shimmering ash around them. Lila could barely gather her voice. And the ranch. It's real, he said quickly. That part isn't a lie. Everything you've seen, every hardship, it's all true. I pay the hands fair, I run the land with my own back, and I've refused every check or offer that tried to pull me back into that gilded prison. She stared at him, the wind tugging at her hair. So you're a millionaire who chooses to live like a simple rancher? He nodded once. And I didn't tell you because. His breath hitched. Because I didn't want you to look at me differently. Lila swallowed hard. Daniel, why would it matter what I think? Because, he said, stepping closer, you're the first person whose opinion I've cared about in a very long time. Her heart stuttered. Lightning couldn't have struck harder. But you heard what Whitmore said, Daniel whispered. Men like me, we don't marry poor women. Not according to people like him. She flinched, not from Daniel but from the memory of those harsh words in town. Daniel gently reached out, lifting her chin with the knuckle of one finger. But I'm not them, he murmured. I've never been them. The snow fell thick around them but she felt nothing cold. And you? Daniel asked softly. Are you frightened now that you know the truth? Her eyes stung but not from the wind. Frightened? She whispered. No. Not frightened. She shook her head slowly. I'm only hurt you didn't trust me sooner. He closed his eyes, jaw tightening with regret. I'm sorry, he breathed. And I'm sorry you ever felt the need to hide, she said, voice trembling. I don't care about your name. Or your fortune. I only care about the man who let me into his home, and let me teach his niece, and let me see his heart. Daniel's eyes opened, soft, searching, vulnerable. He stepped closer still, his breath visible in the winter air. Lila, he whispered, her name a confession in itself. Stay. Just stay. Not because you're poor and not in spite of it but because Emily needs you, and I. He stopped, swallowing the words that scared him most. Lila's voice was barely audible. Daniel. I'm already staying. Something broke loose in him, relief, longing, something deeper. But before either of them moved, a small voice called from the doorway. "Uncle Daniel." "Aunt Lila. Come inside. It's snowing." Daniel froze. Lila's breath caught. Emily beamed from the doorway, bundled in her too large wool coat. Lila opened her mouth to correct her gently, but Daniel laid a hand over hers, stopping her. His eyes were warm, hopeful. "Let her dream a little," he murmured. Lila's lips curved, breath trembling. Neither of them noticed they were still holding hands. Christmas Eve came draped in silver. Snow fell in soft, enchanted curtains across the ranch, frosting the rooftops and muffling every sound. Lanterns glowed warm against frosted windows. The scent of pine and cinnamon drifted from the kitchen where Lila and Emily had been baking since dawn. For the first time the ranch felt alive. It felt like home. Lila wiped flour from Emily's nose as they worked the dough, laughing as the little girl tried, unsuccessfully, to hide her smile. "You're making that face again," Lila teased. Emily scrunched her eyebrows. "What face?" "The one that says you're proud of yourself." Emily fidgeted, cheeks pink. I am a little." It was the most confidence Lila had ever heard in her voice. "Good," Lila whispered. "Because I'm proud of you too." Daniel paused in the hallway at the sound of those words. He leaned against the wall, unseen, watching Lila and Emily laugh together over the mixer. Something warm and dangerous expanding in his chest. He could almost see it. A home filled with laughter. A woman who made everything brighter. A little girl who finally felt safe. And he was the man who loved them both. That afternoon, the miracle. By late afternoon, snow lay thick and bright across the fields. Daniel brought in extra firewood while Lila trimmed the small pine Christmas tree Emily had found. Emily watched Lila carefully string ribbon around the branches, her little hands itching to help but too afraid to ask. Lila noticed. She leaned down, whispering, "This tree needs a brave girl's touch." Emily's eyes widened. "A brave girl?" "Yes," Lila murmured. "One who learned to spell hooves, and baked cookies, and laughs more now than she cries." Slowly, Emily reached out, choosing a tiny wooden star and placing it on a branch near the top. Lila smiled proudly. "Perfect." Emily's chest swelled. She turned toward Daniel. "Uncle Daniel. I put it up." Daniel's breath hitched. She had spoken loudly, confidently, with joy. He crossed the room in 2 strides and lifted her up, spinning her once, laughing and crying at the same time. "That's my girl," he whispered, pressing a trembling kiss to her hair. Lila's eyes stung. She had given him a gift no money could buy. That evening, the dinner. The 3 of them gathered at the table that night, candles flickering over pine branches and a simple meal. Emily insisted on setting 3 extra cookies beside Lila's plate. "For the baby Jesus," she whispered shyly. Lila's heart squeezed. Daniel watched the 2 of them, the lamplight catching in his eyes. Every wall he had ever built was already in pieces. When the meal was finished and Emily nodded sleepily, Lila tucked her into bed. Emily clung to her hand. "You'll be here tomorrow?" she whispered. Lila smoothed her hair tenderly. "I'll be here as long as you need me." Emily smiled, soft, content, and drifted to sleep. When Lila stepped back into the living room, Daniel was standing near the window, the moonlight outlining him like a carved shadow. He didn't speak at first. He simply looked at her. And then he crossed the room and took her hands gently in his. "Lila," he murmured, voice thick with emotion, "you've changed this house, this family, in ways I can't put into words." She swallowed, heart pounding. "You didn't have a reason to let us into your life," he continued. "But you did. And I can't imagine it without you now." Snow danced outside the window like falling stars. "I have something I want to give you," Daniel said quietly. He reached into his pocket, not for a ring. Not yet. But for a small folded paper. He pressed it into her hand. "When you came here," he said, "you thought you were nothing but a poor bride with nowhere to go. But read that." Lila unfolded the paper slowly. Her breath caught. It was the deed to a parcel of land, several acres bordering the east pasture. Her name was written across the top. I don't understand," she whispered. "I signed it this afternoon," Daniel said softly. "It's yours. No matter what happens. A place that's yours in this world." Tears blurred her vision. "Daniel, this is too much." "No," he said, cupping her cheek. "It's not enough. Not compared to what you've given me." Her lips trembled. "Why would you do this?" He exhaled shakily, no longer able to hold back. "Because I love you." The words settled around them like warm snowfall. Lila pressed a hand to her mouth, stunned, full of a hope she had kept buried all her life. "And I don't want you to stay because of a deed, or a job, or Emily," his voice cracked. "I want you to stay because you want to." Lila's tears spilled freely. "I do," she whispered. "Daniel, I never had a home. Not a real one. But I found it here. With you." His breath broke. He pulled her gently into his arms. Her cheek pressed against his chest, and for the first time in years he felt whole. The kiss. Outside the storm softened. Inside time slowed. Daniel tipped her chin upward with trembling fingers. "Lila," he breathed, "may I?" She nodded. Their lips met in a kiss that felt like a lifetime of loneliness breaking at once. A kiss of warmth against cold. A kiss of beginnings. A kiss that tasted like Christmas. When they parted, she was breathless. So was he. "I love you," she whispered. Daniel closed his eyes, his forehead resting against hers. "And I'll spend every day making sure you never regret loving me back." Emily's whisper. Just then a soft sound came from the hallway. Emily stood there, tiny, sleepy, clutching her blanket. Are you gonna be my aunt for real?" she asked timidly. Lila looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Lila. And Lila knelt, opening her arms. "If you'll have me," she whispered. Emily ran into her embrace, small arms wrapping tight around her neck. Daniel blinked away tears. The storm had ended. The night felt holy. And the ranch, once cold, silent, and aching, finally felt like family.